My name is Łukasz Adamski. I'm Deputy Director of Mieroszewski Center, so the institution of this, which is the partner of this conference. And the session, the panel will be devoted to the Central Europe. First, to the role which the Central Europe plays, the weight, political weight, which Central Europe plays during the war, and then diagnosis, and then optimal development of the situation. What role should the Central Europe play, and how Central Europe and its experience, its role within the EU can be used to bolster relations between Ukraine and the EU. We have four panelists, four distinguished guests during this panel session. On my right side, Jan Marian. I'm sorry. Left side. So it's because of this light. Yeah, on my left side is Jan Marian, who is from the Czech Republic, who is the special envoy for Eastern Partnership. And then on my right side, your left side, is our guest from Hungary, Dániel Bartha, the president of the Center for Euro-Atlantic Integration and Democracy. Then Liliana Popescu, who will join us online, General Director of the Romanian Diplomatic Institute. I hope that she is online, okay. And far left. Sławomir Dębski, Director of the Polish Institute of International Affairs. I introduced him as the last panelist, according to your Sławomir wish to have your introductory remarks as last panelist. So we have 80 minutes more or less for the session. I would like that the discussion be important part of our conversation. So please, listening to the panelists, think about your questions, and I will begin with Jan Marian and your vision of the role of Central Europe in the EU. Czech Republic has now a presidency within the EU. You are envoy for Eastern Partnership, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy to be here, and I mean we are in Central Europe still, so it's really important to stress that Ukraine is part of Europe, is part of Central Europe, and we have heard this on the previous panel, and this is vital to cooperate. And the region is obviously much more visible now because of what happened after yet another round of Russian aggression. We were fast to help Ukraine. We were fast to raise this issue. Many in the regions have warned about this before. Many Czech, Polish experts, some politicians have been warning. So I think obviously there is much more willingness now to listen to Central Europe in the EU. And of course we have the expertise, we have think tanks, we have embassies in the region, we have the companies, and we have certain knowledge of the region. And we've been among those who helped, I mean Czechia, Poland, of course the Baltics, with weapons, accommodating migrants, etc. So obviously this is the time when the Central Europe is much more visible, including different formats. But also now this is the time when not only Central Europe, but all the EU member states and NATO members and partners have to learn from Ukraine. So we used to discuss Eastern Partnership as something that's here to help Ukraine, but now I think we have to learn from Ukraine in terms of defense, resilience, etc. And I also hope that maybe, and this would be great, to have the next EAP summit in Kyiv. So I think this would really help with visibility. And I understand there is certain skepticism in Ukraine about the Eastern Partnership, but I still believe that this Eastern policy of the EU is important, and we can come back to this in more details. And as to Czech Presidency, which also helps with the visibility of the region in Brussels, our priorities are obviously resilience, energy, next packages of sanctions, helping Ukrainian migrants, having different events both in Prague and elsewhere, and of course now preparation for winter, financial support to Ukraine, reconstruction. In general, I would say that we need to do more of the same. So we need more support to Ukraine, both political and financial. We need more sanction packages. We need more resilience, both on the EU and Ukrainian side. So we have to continue with this, and of course, the Swedish presidency, which starts in January, I believe, will be very much on board as to the Eastern Partnership and the Eastern partners. And of course, we shouldn't forget about the other partners, namely Moldova. And I think I can stop here. And last point on the Eastern Partnership is that we understand that maybe Ukraine is a bit skeptical, but still it's really important to have some regional framework. Of course, now it's minus Belarus for obvious reasons, but it's still important. But as we heard before, for instance, from Deputy Minister Přidač, this shouldn't substitute or delay the European integration of Ukraine. So it's still useful, it's still relevant, but of course there will be certain process vis-a-vis EU membership perspective. There will be financial support, but still the Eastern Partnership can be useful because it can serve as a means of coordination of the associated trio, etc. But it shouldn't be the substitute. Neither the European political community, nor the Eastern Partnership, nor any other format should substitute the uneasy way of Ukraine to the EU. Thank you.
Mr. Bartha, from your perspective and from the perspective of your country, Hungary, how can Central European states support Ukraine, and how can they influence decision-making process in the whole EU?
Thank you very much for the invitation. And my friend who will speak at the next panel usually starts his contribution, András Rácz, with a disclaimer that he's not representing his country in any forms, but what he says, it's his own opinion. And I usually never repeat that, but in this case I would like to, because I disagree with every single step my country made since February 24th.
I didn't say that you represent Hungary. I say only that you come from Hungary.
It's very hard to comment what my country does, because without this disclaimer, because it's not necessarily following any logic. If we think about logic as a form of representing the interest of your country, or representing or standing up for values, or understanding that you belong to a community, and what does it mean to belong to a community? Because seemingly we forgot that. After this disclaimer, I think there was a lot of important things that we already said about Central Europe, definition of Central Europe. Normally, we wouldn't need to really say that Central Europe doesn't necessarily follow the borders of the countries, and I think the best definitions of Central Europe doesn't really follow the borders of the Central European states. However, in the present situation, with regard to the history of Central Europe and the present geopolitics, we cannot disregard borders, so we have to think about nation states when we're talking about Central European cooperation. Unfortunately, Central European cooperation and the most effective formats of Central European cooperation doesn't really live their most glorious days of existence, namely the V4 cooperation, which could have been a driving force if there would have been an agreement among at least a minimum. They could agree following the Russian aggression, would be a very important instrument within the EU supporting Ukraine. Nevertheless, I think a lot can be done also in the present formats, be it the V4 or the 3Cs initiative. I think in many sense, when it comes to meaningful projects, 3Cs initiative already starting to replace and will replace V4, especially when it comes to the key projects of infrastructure development. which is the most relevant, I think, when it comes to the longer term for Ukraine as well. When it comes to the support of the EU integration, it could be numerous formats. I agree with Jan that coordination matters. In this sense, the V4 example can be a good example how we coordinated our EU accession. I think this is an important lesson for Ukraine to coordinate very closely with Moldova. You don't have to tie yourself to Moldova, it would be a mistake. But strong coordination, cooperation, sharing experience, and lobbying together is vital and necessary. So any development on this regard, any cooperation in this regard will be important. And when it comes to sharing of experience, Central European countries, V4 countries, can be an important lesson for Ukraine, but possibly even more importantly, the Western Balkan integration and its failure in many sense has more relevance and lessons for Ukraine right now. It's more recent. They are negotiating currently under the same format, the same chapters as Ukraine will have at one point if they like to join the EU. To be honest, I always try to be honest, disregard where am I. I don't see the EU integration as very realistic at this point, but you have to aim for the EU integration, and we have to get as close to it as it is possible, because it definitely defines the standards and the frameworks for very strong cooperation with the EU. I hope I will be wrong with this, but we have to go forward to that direction, and then we will get very close to it at least, and I think that's vital. Thank you.
So thank you very much for inviting me and challenging me with the question, what exactly makes Central Europe central? So I will depart from this essential issue. So definitely, Russia's aggression on Ukraine makes Central Europe a central issue in global politics. To the same, to compare. In the situation, we can remind ourselves the situation of Afghanistan, which after 2011 became a central issue in global politics. So why Ukraine / our part of the world plays a role of Afghanistan 10 years ago? Because the outcome of this war would define the main streams of politics, both in Europe and more widely globally. Many definitions would be coined out as an outcome of this war. For instance, how we defined global power or global superpower. Whether Russia is a global or regional power, and how this power should be defined. Well, definitions are not only for the academicians. Politicians use them, and during our introductory panel, we've heard many, 4 politicians using different definitions and trying to embrace political reality in the helm of some academic or I would say intellectual definitions of Central Europe. So definitions are important. The outcome of this war would define definition of Europe, would define European politics, and would define a rule-based order, something which is of high importance for the free world, United States, transatlantic community. And again, it does have its own definition, but I don't want to go into them, just to mark that United States, the free world countries and Central Europe are on the Ukrainian side exactly because we are we implement and we are on the part of this grouping which believes that there should be norms of international behavior, and that that the war it is not a legitimate tool of doing business in 21st century, and we cannot agree on that a big power would be defined as an entity which is allowed not to observe international law, and that any a big power is a norm setter by itself, by its action, not by agreed set of international obligations, international law framework. So that's very important. Why Ukraine and Central Europe is central. We are now in the moment of defining world politics and European politics. Then how we are doing that, that's also important element, because the politics is about doing things. Well, I've heard from Dániel that he's skeptical about how realistic Ukrainian aspiration to become a member of EU and NATO is. And as I hear you, you don't believe it's realistic. So I'm not taking your views to challenge your opinion, but as a point, just a point of departure for my thought, I would like to share with you. Well, the fascinating thing about politics is that it is business of making something impossible possible. So politicians are taking care of making things which at first glance looks hardly possible. And some anecdote from the Polish history. That was I think February 1990, so just after let's say the beginning of transformation in Poland, and the Polish envoy to European institutions at that time handed his credentials to Jacques Delors, head of the Commission. The Polish diplomat name was Jan Kołakowski. And after handing the credentials, well, Delors asked, and what next? So Kołakowski said, well, of course we are going to join European communities. So Delors was absolutely shocked because, well, Poland was a poor country, poor communist country. Nobody had ever thought that about enlargement of anything of communities to the east, to the Eastern Bloc countries. Kołakowski didn't have any instructions to say that. That was just a political offhand response to the political, well, just a small talk question. But it proves something. I mean, if you are really determined, and if you are really ready to pay a price to become a member of institutions somebody don't want to allow you to come to go into, you can do this. staying on course, fighting for your cause, and making things possible. And my last point in this part of intervention, well, when things may become possible, well, the first condition is you need to win this war. If you win a war with Russia, then everything would be on the table, politically. I mean, all members of European communities and NATO would be eager to join you in your victory parade on Chrещatик. I promise you. I mean, there will be run of them to be a part of this party. If you don't win this war, you would not become a member, neither EU nor NATO, because war will be still looming and will be still the part of unfinished business of defying well, what's central to European politics and was central to Central Europe. Thank you.
And now a brief ad vocem, say Jan Marian, and then Liliana.
Thank you. If I may just a tiny comment on this. Ukraine has to win the war. We have to help Ukraine, but we have to do it right on our side, on this side of the EU, because in 2014 we simply didn't do enough. We came up with sanctions, fine, we did a lot, but we didn't do enough. So let's hope that this time, I mean, the EU and the West will do it right. Thank you.
Thank you. And now I think the technique will not fail. Liliana, Popescu.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I have to apologize. I have a bad flu, so I might cough meanwhile, but hopefully not. Now, I was prepared, to be honest, to say a few words about the way in which the war of Russia in Ukraine impacted on Romania's security. But because we are talking about Central Europe, and I listened to my predecessors, I would like to say a few remarks. So first of all, if we are talking about Central European security, I think that various aspects have been impacted by this war. Starting with the sovereignty of states, and this is the clearest case when it comes to Ukraine. But I have to say that also when it comes to revisionist tendencies within Central Europe, and I will not detail here, maybe later on. I think also the security of the citizens has been impacted upon. The economic security, the energy security, food security, informational security, so on and so forth. So if we look at the region and if we look at the states which are part of this region, I think all these dimensions have been affected and we cannot neglect that. Now, when it comes to the definition of Central Europe, I have to say that during the last decades, the definition of Central Europe shifted. Central Europe is a shifting reality. In the beginning of the 90s, Central Europe meant Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, Slovak Republic. Later on, Central Europe encompassed Romania, maybe Bulgaria, maybe Serbia, and definitely if we look geographically, Ukraine is in the heart of Europe. It's definitely the heart of Europe. So if we look at the region right now, we may notice that it's a very uneven region in the sense that The countries that compose this region are very heterogeneous from many viewpoints. If we look at Hungary, we see a certain kind of regime, and we saw recently the protests there, the teachers, and not only. And I appreciate the position of our Hungarian colleague in respect with this. Now, if we look at Poland again, there is a regime that is comes against many rights. I'm thinking of, for example, women's rights. It's a country which is definitely not favorable to women's rights. If we look at Romania, we have now a coalition, which is a grand coalition. We don't know how long it will last, but I would say that from the viewpoint of human rights and also from the viewpoint of civil rights, I think Romania is doing well, I would say, at the regional level, by and large. Of course, there are many things which are not all right. Now, when it comes to the situation in Ukraine, and I heard some remarks about the rules-based order. To me, this is very clear. At this point in Central Europe, either we have a rules-based order or we have the use of force. And it is clear that Ukraine is challenged now by this use of force. And if we let this use of force to overcome the rules-based order in this part of Europe, I think the whole Europe is going to be affected. Now, I would also like to say a few words about the proximity of the war to other countries apart from Ukraine. So the Central Europe actually is in the very vicinity of the war, and I believe that there is a asymmetry, let me put it like that, between Western European EU members and Central and Eastern European EU members, in the sense that I think that in the western part of the European Union is not perceived. I don't think that they can feel what is happening in Ukraine. Of course, they know intellectually there is a war there. There are effects. There are consequences in terms of energy prices, prices in general, economic crisis, so on and so forth. But I don't think that they realize what is the reality of the war. And what I would like to do is make a comparison. It's like I remember the 2014, 15, 16. We in Romania did not perceive, not even people who were knowledgeable about what was going on. It was somewhere far away, the war. It was in Donbass. It was, of course, we knew that the Russians were sending the so-called humanitarian convoys, and we knew about the continual exchanges of and war as such, but we didn't feel it as such. So maybe we can learn from our experience in the years 2014 up to this spring, February this year, to convey to our Western partners that this is serious, that this is actual use of force here in our region. Because I think that if we look over French, Spanish, Portuguese, Luxembourg, Belgium, and so on, for them, the reality of the war in Ukraine is non-existent. It's something abstract. For us in this region, we felt the refugees. We saw the problems. We tried to help in many ways. so on and so forth. I'm not going to go into details with the trade of grains, but particularly with the refugees. But in Western Europe, people don't feel that. So I think it's our duty to do things to make them aware of the reality of the war. Now, when it comes to the cooperation, regional cooperation, I would like to emphasize maybe one initiative which was started in 2015, the B9 format, which was very instrumental to particularly this year, but not only, starting in 2015. This B9 format is an association of Eastern Flank states, and they contributed a lot to maybe making aware NATO members of the importance of NATO's long-term deterrence and defense posture in this region. And certainly Romania was more and is concerned a lot about the southern part of the eastern flank and the importance of the Black Sea, which is militarized now by Russia. So I would stop here, and maybe we can discuss further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Definitely, we'll have opportunity to address remarks of other panelists and then address remarks from the public. But before I will open the floor, I would like to ask one short question to all of you, since I think I have an impression that we didn't touch one important aspect, which was in the program, namely, you talked, many of you, about definitions. What is Eastern Europe? In 1950, Polish historian Oskar Halecki wrote an excellent essay book, Limits and Divisions of European History, when he proposed the term East Central Europe, encompassing both Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, but also Ukraine and Belarus. Now I have the impression that another book is needed, Limits and Divisions of European Politics, with regards to the Russian aggression and with regard to EU answers. So some people are saying that Europe is divided into the group of countries who would like that Ukraine will win the war, and others who would like that Ukraine will not lose the war. So my question to you is, do you see such certain divisions between mainstream of Western Europe and, let's say, mainstream of Central Europe with regards to Russia's aggression, and how then political weight of Central European countries can be used to persuade our Western partners to, let's say, to implement politics which would be in bigger accordance with our expectations?
If I may, I'm a diplomat, so I will be positive react. First, I think we are leading by example. I mean, weapon deliveries, help to migrants, etc., etc. Political support to Ukraine, clear support to the European perspective of Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. But I'm quite optimistic, because I think, as Liliana mentioned, I'm a bit more optimistic, because I think other EU member states also understand now that the situation is different, and Russia has been doing its best to wake us up, all of us in the EU, and I think then they are much more open to listen to us, to listen to my minister when he tells his counterparts that Russian diplomats are not diplomats, and we should get rid of them, and we have done it basically in Prague. So I think there's much more willingness to listen to us, to understand what's really happening, and in this regard, I'm a bit more optimistic than Liliana.
Okay.
And one more point, let's see, and this will be crucial, in 1 year or next spring, when the first round of sanctions expire in 1 year. Let's see how we maintain unity, but this is not only about so-called old or West Europe, this is also about some other EU member states, of course.
Okay, thank you. Dániel, you wanted to react?
Yeah, I wanted to react, and I will respond your question by reacting to some what was said already. Just a side comment: the number of Russian diplomats accredited to Hungary increased since February 24th. So not every country is the same in this sense. Yeah, maybe. So when it comes to the EU integration of Ukraine, I was skeptical, and I'm still skeptical because of the communication and the failures we did as EU previously as well. I remember working in Moldova in 2010 when basically Moldovan politicians announced that based on their discussions with the representatives of the European Commission, Moldova's European integration is a matter of 2 or 3 years. Which was nonsense back then. And I hear similar comments today from Ukrainian politicians without any warning from European politicians about the prospects of Ukraine. And I think it's very dangerous because it gives a false impression to the public, and that raises expectations, and if those expectations are not met with the reality, it creates a disillusionized public, and that's dangerous. We know that joining the EU is also a diplomatic effort and political effort, as you told. We've seen the example of NATO accession in case of Sweden and Finland, but it's different when it comes to the EU because we know that adopting the acquis requires currently, and we have the studies and calculations based on the Western Balkans, from 15 up to 30 years of preparation and negotiations. And we can cut this timeline, and we can change the rules, and we should do that. But we cannot cut them so much that this would be at least 5 to 10 years. Also, as you said, because Ukraine has to win the war, or at least reach to a ceasefire, and we should turn this ceasefire with a unified effort by supporting Ukraine to something that the Russians wouldn't have a taste to challenge any longer. And that would require a significantly different policy from the EU compared to 2014 and following the period of 2014, because we have failed a large extent to support Ukraine, to support Ukrainian reforms, and I believe we failed also since February 24th to support Ukraine. We focus a lot on weapons support, and we should, because first, as you told, and we told several times, they have to win this war. But when we think about the financial instruments, economic instruments, they are still weak and not sufficient. And we have to change that. And in this, and I reach to Central Europe at this, Central Europe will be essential, because we've seen in case of the Central European integration that the most important stakeholders, or at least among the most important stakeholders, were our immediate neighbors and the business and companies of the immediate neighbors. So any successful integration of Ukraine is impossible with the proper participation of the Central European business, companies and state, and their willingness and effectiveness when it comes to investment and development. And if that happens, if we are successful to instrumentalize our business and basically give incentives to our business to do that, I think there is a greater chance to move forward more efficiently and faster towards the European integration of Ukraine.
Thank you. Sławomir now.
Well, I'm a political analyst, so I'm also, optimist. Politics makes, a lot of things possible. There is, of course, a logic of, let's say, diplomats, bureaucrats who believe that there are criteria, there are negotiations, there are chapters. But all of this process, however important, I don't neglect that there are rooms for doing politics. Chapters are being closed each by each on the ground of the political decision. Enlargement of institution, it is a political decision. It is not a bureaucratic process. So this is, I'm saying this not to disencourage Ukrainians from doing reforms, but just to tell them that, you know, there is the light in the tunnel, and the politics can still make a lot of things possible. If they win the war, a lot of things would be possible. And just example from last February. I mean, nobody in the EU before the Russia's aggression on Ukraine or renewed Russian aggression on Ukraine would dare to grant Ukraine a candidate status. And suddenly, something impossible was made possible within the days. So, yes, we should. Yes, we should keep in mind that there are important steps in the accession process, and you need to adapt acquis communautaire, and you need to introduce a lot of reforms. But, well, in the end of the day, there are politicians who judge actually the process and the progress and the achievement. In the certain moment of time, they need to take the political decision that the job was done. And experience shows the job has never been done in the moment when they made this decision. So that's the same with you know, Sweden and Finland accession to NATO. I mean, before Russia's aggression on Ukraine, nobody dared to think that such thing would have been possible anytime soon. And suddenly, you know, politics changed the world. So I think, you know, my last point. If Ukraine wins the war, the Central Europe, including Ukraine, would become the fastest growing part of Europe because of demand, because of the population, because of need of reconstruction. So this part of the world would create enormous economic magnet for investment, financial flows, for you know, a political presence, and that could create an additional engine which would change the dynamic of European politics. So, you know, the question would be put on the table whether we need Ukraine, the fastest growing part of Europe, within our communities or outside communities, and what of these two options would be most beneficial for our societies. And my last point, I think, because responding directly to Łukasz question whether, you know, how these divisions of those between those who want Ukraine winning and those who don't want Ukraine losing, you know, how this division is going now. I think what has changed since February is that European societies changed attitude to Eastern Europe, particularly to Ukraine. Before the war, the widespread wisdom was that east of, well, NATO/EU eastern flank is Russia. So there is, Eastern Europe is about Russia. And Russia first policy was employed. And even after 2014, the Siemens was supplied turbines to occupied Crimea because Russia first policy prevailed. Now the situation is different in that sense that the European societies, European publics are very much in favor of helping Ukraine and providing assistance to Ukraine. 70% of French, 70%, almost 70% of Germans are demanding their governments to be, on the side of Ukraine. That's a political factor which would influence the foreign policies of these countries. And there are societies who now understand that there are more nations in Eastern Europe than only Russia. And Russia is not the country which should dominate the definitions and the political landscapes in eastern part of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. Traditionally, Jan's brief ad vocem, and then Liliana.
On the European integration of Ukraine, I think it will take time and reforms will be needed. In the meantime, and this is something we can push for, much can be done on technical level, on trade, on roaming, on programs and agencies of the EU, science cooperation, DCFTA, etc. So much can be done even without and before the formal membership. So I think our policy should be, in the meantime, everything but institutions for Ukraine. So, and this is something we have to push for. Thank you.
Thank you, Liliana. And then please think about your question.
Yes, well, maybe I will be the bad cop in this gang. Just to remind you that Russia declared, well, Putin declared that what he wants is to go back to the situation before 1997. That means that all Central Europe would be out of NATO, which means that we definitely don't want Russia to win. And not only that we don't want Russia to win, we would love that Ukraine would win. I'm not sure, however, that this would be possible, given the context. Now, if we look at some aspects like Russia changed its economy into a war economy. At the same time, Europe is very heterogeneous. I mean, the European Union, and it cannot change its economy because, well, it can in principle, but it needs a decision at the European Council level to do that. And this does not look like it's going to be the situation. Now, we also need, I mean, what I'm saying is that we need to be realistic in the sense that we need not to lie to ourselves about the situation. And this includes the fact that Germany, which is an important engine, economic engine of the European Union, has been hardly hit. Its economy, the gas prices rocketed because of Germany is not importing from Russia at a low price. At the same time, Germany made a rational decision, to increase its military expenditure. So Germany had two important advantages before the war. The gas price is low and low military expenditures. Now, if we look at the interesting visit of Mr. Olaf Scholz in Beijing, we realize that the third pillar of Germany's economy, the trade, cannot be given up. Now, when we think of China, we should think of what Velina Chakarova labeled as the dragon bear. So the situation is rather complicated, economically speaking, and we need to remember that the European Union is first and foremost an economic union. Of course, many of us would love that EU would be a federation, but it's not. even though its founders wanted it to be a federation. When it comes to the European Union accession by Ukraine, of course, this is a hell of a task. We need to remember that there were other countries that started, that they had the status of candidate, like Turkey, and nothing happened afterwards. I mean, yes, they started the chapters, but it stalled basically. Not to say about the change of the regime in Turkey. Of course, that the European Union, and there are analyses in this sense, that European Union needs to adjust its process of accession, because if we look at what is happening in the Balkans, again, in the Western Balkans, there is a situation in which the accession process is not progressing spectacularly, and maybe the good sign is that Germany and France they are taking a new stand when it comes to the Balkans, and to bringing and supporting the countries in the Western Balkans to make progress when it comes to the accession. Of course, this is also because of the influence of and the stronghold of Russia, at least in Serbia.
Okay,
And
perhaps
Serbia
I will stop here, since you will have a chance to respond to questions from the public, and perhaps to complement your remarks. But we have to now open the floor, and I see already.
That's fine.
Oh, excellent.
Yes.
Excellent. I see already many questions.
I'm Jakub Olchowski, Institute of Central Europe in Lublin, Poland, and also University of Maria Curie-Skłodowska in Lublin, Poland. I find very important what Ms. Popescu said about the West. It's trendy to say today the collective West, including even Vatican. The West never understood Russia's war, and the West, the collective West, doesn't understand Russia's war, because it doesn't understand Russia in general. Because mostly from the Western perspective, Russia is a normal state. I mean, the Westphalian style state that you can negotiate with.
Please ask questions.
Negotiate with and make deals with, etc. But you can't. So the question is, some speakers said that Ukraine has to win the war, and they said it multiple times even. What do you mean? How do you imagine? What do you mean by winning the war by Ukraine, technically?
Okay. So what does it mean to win the war? Your question?
So my name is Alexander Kostreba, and I represent analytical platform Center for Economic Recovery. Mr. Marian mentioned in his speech, and also it's kind of widespread idea within Ukrainian governmental and non-governmental sector, that Ukraine can bring something new to the EU, and at the same time, European Union is extremely suspicious to some changes, some shackles of status quo. So my question for panelists is, what, in your opinion, should be the main promoting of Ukrainian EU integration narrative? It's more like reformists and frontrunner, or more modest and stick to all policies?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Who else?
Veronika Movchan, Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, Kyiv, Ukraine. I also have the same question. What do you see the victory of the war? Was the question basically to Sławomir Dębski. Sorry, I hope I pronounced this surname correctly. And also I have a question to Marian about the Eastern Partnership versus Central Europe. I'm not sure that this notion that we discussed now, that the shift of the Central Europe and centrality of Europe, how it's reconciled with this Eastern Partnership idea. And I have short, small comment, very brief, that Ukraine is implementing EU acquis for 8 years now, so that should be taken into account, and we are counting the years for implementation.
Thank you. Igor Janke.
Hello, I'm Igor Janke from Poland. I run a Freedom Institute and have a podcast called Układ Otwarty. I have a question relating to Hungary, to Hungarian topic, which was already mentioned. Here the division is not just between those who wants Ukraine to win and who doesn't want Ukraine to lose. The division here is much deeper. So my question is, what could be the consequences of this of the situation? How we can influence, how Central Europe can influence European politics, since we are so deeply divided? How we can function together in V4? How we can build 3Cs initiative, since the division on such a crucial topic is so deep. And I'm asking as a author of enthusiastic biography of Viktor Orban, which I published 10 years ago. And I remember him as this guy who in 1989 was the first Central European leader who called Russian troops to leave Hungary, whom I perceived for years as a transatlantist, and now its situation is a little bit different. So my question is, what the consequences could be for our cooperation, and how?
Thank you, Felix Hett from Friedrich Ebert Stiftung. I just have a short question also on this EU membership perspective thing, because I understand the position of the current German government, or at least the Chancellor, in such a way that they say, okay, a membership perspective for Ukraine, yes, which is a significant shift, but let's reform the voting rights within the EU first. So I would be interested in hearing Central European perspectives on that, and how far are your respective governments ready for such a step? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. And now we have, I think, around 4 minutes for each panelist to address questions, and then we'll finish on time the panel. Sławomir.
So very briefly.
4 minutes is quite a long time.
Yes. So very briefly, it looks that the real division is between those who do believe that Russia can be defeated, and the other groups which don't. And actually, if you don't believe that Russia can be defeated, there is no reason to help Ukraine, because that's pointless endeavor. So you should, perhaps just focus on some homeopathic assistance to Ukraine, just to please this part of the public which demand some action from you, from the government. So I think that the Central Europeans are actually those who not only do believe that Russia can be defeated, but actually defeated Russia, either politically or even militarily many times. So our experience is different. Russia can be defeated and must be defeated if we want to live in the better world. So that's first remark. The second about winning, because also in this group I believe there are those who don't believe Russia can be defeated. So it's unrealistic to even pose such an aspiration. So how we could, when we would see Ukraine winning over Russia? Well, it is not a rocket science. It has been carefully studied, and there are libraries of books written about defeats. So So, one side is winning over the other in the moment when the other is being defeated and feels that it was defeated, recognize its defeat. That's a kind of the maximalistic definition of the winning. But there is also a minimalistic definition of the winning. It is simply denying the aggressor its war aims. So Putin defined Russia's war aims against Ukraine as, destroying Ukrainian statehood and annihilation of Ukrainian nation. There are maximalistic goals. If Ukraine prevails, it would mean that it denies both. That Ukraine state would survive, and a Ukrainian nation would defend itself against the attempt to annihilate Ukrainians. I mean, that would be the minimalistic definition of Russia's defeat. And Russia, I think, is quite close to recognize at least this minimalistic definition. That they are unable neither to destroy Ukrainian statehood nor to annihilate Ukrainian nation.
Thank you, Jan.
Thank you very much.
With advocem.
On the voting, I think well noted. I mean, this is something many European governments will have to discuss, and I think this will be quite sensitive, and there might be different views on the future on anonymity in the EU voting among Czech governing parties. So we know that this will be needed, and some EU member states ask for reforms of voting before enlargement. So let's see. On of the question of Veronika Movčan on EAP and the Central Europe, I'm not sure if I got the substance, but I think the policy is still the same. It's with all the 5 minus Belarus, so it's 5. It's part of the European neighborhood policy, and of course there are many EU member states who are much more engaged than, for instance, let's say the southern wing. So these countries, like-minded countries like Czechia, Poland, Romania, Baltic states, maybe some Nordic, will continue to push for this policy. And obviously now we have Sweden, and then we have the new trio where Hungary will be present as well, the next EU presidency trio. So let's expect maybe less attention to some issues. And this leads me to the previous question on the label of the EU in the future, reforms or like being very proactive or being modest, I don't know. But let's take into account the future possible Ukraine fatigue, of course. So this will happen. But let's be optimistic again. Even after 2014, we managed to continue our support. We have managed to maintain the sanctions year by year. So let's be a bit optimistic. And on the peace, of course, this is something Ukraine has to decide. Ukraine has to decide on the terms. For me, obviously, this is full territorial integrity, including Crimea.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. You advocate?
Well, about this qualified majority voting, I think two issues, or 3 even. First, it is being seen in this part of the world as a German attempt to put blame for not accepting Ukraine as a part of the EU on the Central Europeans. So it's a trick. That's the perception. Mm-hmm. The second, of course, we can talk about a lot of things, but I believe the room would be created for any kind of discussion on reform of decision-making process in the EU if a German power within the EU would not be so often overused. Then if there is a self-limitation on German side, or perhaps the self-limitation would have also an impact on the voting weight on other issues, then I think we would find ground for negotiations or compromise.
Thank you. Dániel?
Thank you very much. I agree a lot of things what you said about winning the war, and I agree that the Ukraine, I believe, already won this war. The question is whether it's going to win the peace, and whether, and I think that you also defined it, whether a Russian political elite come to peace with the outcome of the war. Because as long as the peace will be challenged, there will be impact on the Euro-Atlantic integration. And then comes the next step, is winning the peace includes basically running a reform agenda that you already mentioned as part of the European integration. And in this regard, Ukraine is not fully trusted partner, because we've seen Ukraine did not so well when it came to reforms. And the other requirement is stability, and I don't want to just talk about Ukraine. If we think about Moldova and the instability of Moldova, even now, you understand more probably some of the Western countries' sort of requirement, expectation of at least some years of stability in a given country before joining the European Union. And I agree with Sławomir with his definition about winning. I don't necessarily agree about the necessity of the reforms of the decision-making process in the Council, because we are talking about the Council when we are talking about decision-making reforms. I think that was one of the issue. It's not Ukraine focused, because this was raised when it came to Western Balkan integration as well. So it's not. I believe it's not a German trick to do anything with the Ukrainian integration. It's a valid concern, and it's related to Central Europe. And the requirement on the rule of law is related to Central Europe, and the experience of the Western country with Central Europe. They don't want to repeat what they believe was same mistakes with Ukraine, and therefore they would like to see absolute guarantees. And I think this is also a response about the reform processes until the European integration. It's not. The question is not how radical these reforms are or strict reform policies are. I think the question is on what basis those reforms are made. If there is a wide consultation among the political stakeholders, if the rule of law respective, if the checks and balances are strengthened in an appropriate way in these countries. I think these are the real. This will be the real task, and this will be the real requirements when it comes to joining the EU. And once it was asked about the possible reforms of the EU decision-making, I think there is something, a way to go forward, what is called the Jagiellonian Compromise, and that is something that even the Hungarian government raised to the of the agenda. It's basically would create a more fair decision-making with the EU by basically more focusing on the each country's population size, and it would be more fair. It would be an automatic system, a fair system based on the square root of the number of citizens of each country, and it's a tested system that that would result in the European. In practice, it would mean weaker, very small countries, which are currently overrepresented in decision making, but also weaker big countries. So it would increase the power of the medium-sized countries. Obviously, it came from Hungary supports that, so it's good for Hungary, but it's also good for most of the Central European countries. And according to every test and every check, it would be a much more fair and effective system when it comes for decision making. So this kind of reforms, I think, inevitable and even useful for the European Union.
Okay, thank you. Now Liliana.
Yes, first of all, let me express my deepest admiration for the Ukrainian people, and to say that Romania constantly supported the accession of Ukraine to the European Union and to NATO, and we will do so constantly in the future. And as we offered support to Moldovans, and we recently had in the Diplomatic Institute in Romania, we organized a session of training for diplomats and high public servants to support, to teach them what we know from our own accession period of time and process. So we are ready to support Ukraine as much as possible. And I think that what is important, so despite of the, of course, a few things, unpleasant things that I said, I think it is very important that Ukrainians had a very high morale in this war, and I think this is very important. The morale is essential in any confrontation, and we are with you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you also. So I would like to thank all panelists for this discussion, which actually shows that we are united in terms of what should be done for Ukraine, and we can slightly differ in terms of, for example, what is the assessment of Western states' approach to Russia, and what are requirements floating from the rule of law. But definitely we can continue the discussion during the lunch break. I would like to thank you also for your questions.